Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Diverse Stars podcast, third season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. It's an amazing episode because Melissa Flores boards the mothership to talk to Nacelleverse. Now, come on board as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Miss Flores. Thank you so much for coming to Traverse the Stars podcast.
Hey, Jeff, thank you for having me.
Totally my pleasure. So, we sort of start off with a question of inspiration. So, what inspired your love for comics and who your earliest influences?
Who inspired my love for comics and who are my earliest influences? So I got into comics relatively late. I was not a kid that had my father was an immigrant. My mom was not an immigrant, but she was from Texas and obviously not a big comic reader. So I didn't really have access to comics when I was a kid. My closest access to that was those trading cards. Do you remember those trading cards that you could collect for Marvel?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I had plenty of them.
So I went to a summer science camp at UCLA and they sold those trading cards in one of those bookstores. And that's
Nice.
how I got into it. I would collect a big binder of all these trading cards and I remember getting like a saber tooth holograph and I was really excited about it. So that's kind of like my first introduction. And then of course, obviously the X-Men movies and everything like came about and like the X-Men animated series. But I didn't really read a lot of comics until I played Injustice.
Mm.
And I got the deluxe version and it came with like issue one. And even like this is how like ignorant I was about the comics. I like I thought it was gonna be the whole story, and then I was like, how are they gonna do all that in 22 pages? And then I read it, I'm like, wait, this isn't even the beginning. What the hell? So I ended up having to go and find year one and then year two. And so like I got introduced to essentially through Tom Taylor, who I got lucky with enough to work with later. And that's kind of how I fell in love with comics. And then when I started working with uh Power Rangers, I started working with Boom Studios because they were adapting Power Rangers and Cal Higgins was writing Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And I learned then the nuts and bolts of what it takes to actually make comics. And so in terms of my influences, honestly, like aside from the classic great people that everybody reads, like Trey Moore and all those people.
Mm.
For me, it was really like Kyle Higgins, Tom Taylor, Ryan Parrott, Margaret Bennett, um, all these like modern amazing writers that I literally was so fortunate enough to learn from directly because I got to read their scripts as I was working as an executive. And really it influenced how like I got to see up close how they work and that really influenced how I work. And I'm very lucky to still work with a lot of those people today.
So now you're writing for the Nacelleverse. Now, for those who don't know, I get the feeling people know the properties when I name them, but they may not necessarily know the term Nacelleverse. So what is the Nacelleverse?
So the Nacelleverse is created by Nacelle, which is a toy company, by Brian Volkweiss, who is he's an amazing producer, director, but you might know him from the toys that made us, like
Hmm.
on Netflix. That's him. And so if you ever get the opportunity to meet him, you absolutely should go and talk to him because he is absolutely like the chaotic genius that you expect him to be. He literally that guy, just so passionate, loves toys so much. And when he saw all these properties that were just kind of sitting on a shelf collecting dust, these are properties from his childhood too, and different properties that he knew were really cool. And so he just decided to buy them all. And so he got the Great Garloo, which is from like the 50s. He got Roboforce, Biker Mice from Mars, Sectaurs, Power Lords, like who knows how many more. And he kind of said, like, I'm going to create my own cinematic universe and put them all in it. And so he's creating these amazing animated series for each of these. And I am the lucky devil that gets to bring all that to comics. And because the comics are much faster than animated series, I'm also the lucky person that gets to introduce you to the world first, which is very cool.
And as a kid, I remember Biker Mice from Mars. I remember watching that. I don't remember the Sectaurs short TV series, but I remember there was a short miniseries. But I do remember the toys.
Hmm.
What is your connection to these?
I mean, I loved Becker Mice from Mars when I was a kid. I'm gonna be honest, some of the other ones I had no idea. But that's what's kind of cool about it because there was literally nothing. Like I remember that first meeting with Oni Press and Nacelle. I went in, I'm like, hey, do you guys have Bibles? They're like, nope. I was like, oh, okay. So literally it was you got to see all the crazy designs and everything that you saw on the wall for them. Um, but everything else, I kind of just had to rely on Matt Gravinsky, who's the VP over at Nacelle, and my own internet knowledge. So like I went looking for that Sectaurs
Hmm.
miniseries. I bought all the comic books. And I did the same for Roboforce. Some of these, like Garlu had nothing. Garlu, I saw like a 50s commercial, black and white, that was just literally like, this is a monster. Come play with this big monster. Uh, and so it's a matter of just working with Brian and Matt and the folks at Nacelle and creating these characters. Some of them really easy because Roboforce is already in development. I got to read the scripts. I got to see a cuts to see what they were doing. And like Biker Mice from Mars has a very substantial cult following. You know, you don't mess with Biker Mice from Mars because they'll be mad at you. So those were easy. But some of the other ones like Sectaurs and Power Lords, I mean, Power Lords, what do they have? They have 3 comics and that's it. And it's such a weird IP. Very cool and very interesting. And I think you can do a lot of really fun, cool stuff with it. But it's not like you can look at an animated series and be like, this is what this is. Like it's just so out there. And it was really fun to be able to dive in and be like, okay, what is it about each one of these things that makes it different and unique and fun? But what also is the connecting humanity or a connecting emotion that makes it feel like these all could live in the same world? And that's we did that with Garlu.
Now, remember what I remember of the Power Lords, it's a two-sided toy that when you turn it around onto the other side, it's the superhero. What's
Yeah. So yeah, it's like Adam Power, and Adam Power basically was the prince of this world that essentially when he accessed a specific stone, he can turn into a power lord, which is this like superhero with like blue skin and crazy eyes and like a third eye. And it's pretty cool. He's like Superman, but if Superman was like the alien he's supposed to be, you know? Like if Superman showed up and he looked like an alien, you're like, oh my God, what is that? That's that's him.
so is it more comforting or nerve-wracking to have properties that you're writing for that people kind of sort of know from my generation, but don't really have any information? Because on the one hand, you have very little expectations because there's very little said about them. But the other hand, there's kind of a sort of an idea that you're trying to live up to. So is it better or worse that there's not more information on these characters?
I mean, it varies. When I was doing Roboforce, it was easy because they had already done the hard work for me. They had redeveloped everything. For Biker Mice, it was nerve-wracking. Because I'm just like, there's so many episodes and I just know I'm gonna miss something. And that was tough. But I've been writing Power Rangers for like 2 years now. And so I kind of used to like, oh, okay, I'm probably gonna miss something, and the fans are probably gonna catch it, and I'm gonna do my darndest. And I've written for Marvel too, and beloved characters like Spider Gwen, so I can't. I don't want to say I'm used to it because I don't think you're ever used to being that terrified of anything, but you definitely learn to respect the franchise as much as you can, and also acknowledge that you're not perfect and you're gonna probably forget something. So you just my hope is always is that the fans will forgive me if they realize or see how much passion and love I put into every story. And so far that has been the case.
Now, quite obviously, these properties were created with any sense that they would ever be joined in a unified universe. I
Yeah,
mean, the people who did Sectaurs did not realize Biker Mice from Mars were in their connected future because they were made at different times, different companies, that kind of thing.
correct.
So when you're creating a universe that these all can believably live within, what did you have to do to massage them creatively or tonally to make sense together?
I just had to find that I had to find that person. You had to find that way in so that people who didn't see we didn't know any of these would actually be able to be introduced to them in a certain way. And so what we did is we were talking through the Great Garlu is the one that's probably the least developed because he's the biggest unknown. He's a green alien monster that can grow really big, and that's literally all there is to him. And so we got to use that character essentially as a blank slate. And so with Garlu, you're able to the premise of the Nacelleverse issue 0 is that his home has blown up and he now needs to find a new home. And he goes with a character called Lipa um, to all these different planets to try and find a new home. It's very Goldilocks, you know. This one's too violent. This one's too Marsy, and through that you start to touch onto the other worlds that we meet. You meet the Sectaurs, you meet the Power Lords, you meet the biker mice, and you see a window into their conflicts that we can then touch on in the miniseries in a more fulfilling way.
Now, I might be reading too much into things, but I'm going to read too much into things. Lipa states in the Zero issue of the Nacelleverse that he is not defined by the past, he is defined by the future. Now, my brain that, let's say, reads too much into things, it's referring to the characters of the Nacelleverse. In other words, do not define it by what you know of the cartoons. This is going to be something from this point forward that they're and how they're going to exist. Am I reading too much into the symbolism there?
I would think not. I think you're absolutely right. I think these are reinvented. You're going to have to make some tweaks. I think the ones you're going to probably see the closest to their original iterations are the biker mice because again, you don't mess with the biker mice. But you know, Roboforce has some substantial tweaks to it. They've been redeveloped. I think Power Lords and Sectaurs will do the same because we're trying we're trying to make people fall in love with these characters the same way that we love them, and so we're going to respect their DNA, um, but also we're going to do what we can to make sure it's a good story, and still holds true to the spirit of the franchise as well.
So we're going to have a Sector series spinning out. We're going to have a Biker Mice from Mars, Roboforce, Power Power Lords. Is there going to be a Garlu series coming spinning out as well, or is he going to live in Roboforce? Because you kind of hint that he's going to stay on Earth.
Yeah, he kind of lives in Roboforce for now. I don't. That's really up to Nacelle, I think, and Oni Press. But for now, he lives in we kind of told his story a little bit already. So he kind of had his little moment to shine in issue 0, and Roboforce will be about Roboforce. But you're going to see him in there. You're going to see a lot of these worlds still connected. Throughout, and you're going to see a little bit more how these worlds connect a little more. But we're going to save a lot of the meaty, big stuff, obviously, for the animated series. But that doesn't mean that these miniseries aren't going to be significant or aren't going to open up the lore in a really fun way, so that when you watch both the animated series and the miniseries, or you read the miniseries, you're going to see how they connect and hopefully learn a little more about the characters that you didn't know before.
So that's actually an interesting piece of information that you bring up because, like, I know a few of these becoming animated series. We'll
Hmm.
dive a little bit more into that a little bit later. But when I think of properties, licensed properties that also have active series in place, I'm thinking of like Star Wars, Star Trek, where the comic books do not are not considered canon when it
Hmm.
comes to the animation. Basically, whatever the TV or movies are is the lore, and the comic books kind of just use the characters. How
Right.
connected are we talking between what we're going to see in the animated series and what's going to exist within the regular series?
I mean, I'm working really closely with Brian and Matt to make sure that the stories that we tell in the comic books absolutely matter in the animated series. So as far as as far as I'm concerned, they're one and the same. It really obviously that is always going to be up to Nacelle to decide. It's their property, but we are writing as if they live in the same world. So if you read the comic book for Roboforce, you're going to get to know information about characters that will inform the animated series when you watch it. You're gonna be like, oh, that's why blah 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 blah. So hopefully that'll be the thing. They're gonna live in the same world. And they're gonna inform each other. But hopefully you're not gonna have to read the miniseries in order to watch the animated series. It's just gonna deepen the world and deepen the lore for you in a really fun way.
How
Think of it as
about
like a prequel.
how about in the reverse? If you don't watch the animated series, but you want to enjoy just the comic book, will the comic book make sense without the
Oh,
animated series?
absolutely. Absolutely. But hopefully it'll be enough that you want to watch the animated series. You're gonna be like, I don't have enough of these characters. I want to see what else they're doing.
Do we know where they're going to be showing? I mean, are we talking regular TV? Are we talking streaming?
That is a question for Nacelle. We'll see.
Miss L is
Nacelle.
oh Nacelle. They said Miss L. I was like, like, who's the mysterious Miss L in the background?
That sounds like a cool character though.
So Garlu, I think, was a fantastic character, and he was interesting to have the story told from his perspective. As the story goes on, he finds Lipa, and we find that Lipa isn't necessarily the good guy that we thought he is.
Right.
Is Lipa going to be a antagonist within Roboforce? Is he? How does he connect and Garlu connect to their own storylines?
You will see Lipa again. I can't tell you how or why that again is, but you will see Lipa pop up in that world. He was specifically created, not just to live in issue 0, but moving forward. And the same with Garlu. You're going to see him when you see him in the Roboforce animated series. He kind of has become that lounge singer famous that you see him at the end of the series. But now you get to see how he got there, and so their stories matter. Lipa is going to be a really interesting character, but I don't think I can spoil how or why you see him again. I will say that he was intentionally created to live beyond the book.
So when you were thinking about where, because the first the zero issue, which is really kind of interesting, is Garlu trying to find a new home.
Right.
His people are gone. He's trying to find somewhere new to live. When you were thinking about the different worlds of the Nacelleverse, why is Roboforce's world or the future Earth the ideal home for Garlu?
I think it's probably the world that feels the most diverse for him. It feels the most settled. Every other world he sees is either on the brink of civil war or in the middle of some revolution or catastrophe. I think Earth, has become a melting pot by the time you get to it. You don't just see humans there; you see robots, you see aliens. Um, and it has its own problems, absolutely, but it feels the most welcoming to a refugee like Garlu, and it allows him to make his place there, which is not. I think if he had settled into, Symbion, which is the world of the Sectaurs,
Hmm.
that would have been a much different case for him. There's not, it's not really a melting pot the way Earth was.
And as far as Bucket Bunnies from Mars, let's say that seems a bit of a rough planet as well.
Yeah.
Is Garlu going to be at his best in a planet that is more prone to bring out his more violent, larger side?
I don't think so. I think I think Garlu doesn't like that side of himself. I think if you see how I've written him, he's a very gentle soul. He has a little bit of a temper because he has a lot of rage that he internalizes, but I think he really truly, I think he does it, if he wanted to be that big guy, he'd be that big guy all the
Hmm.
time. But I think his true self is the little guy that just wants to live his life and be a friend to people. And so um that's what he's allowed to do here on Earth. He doesn't have to be the guy that resorts to violence. And he kind of, accidentally stumbled his way into a new career as a lounge singer, but he he doesn't really like the violence. I think it's just something he has to do because that's just what happens when you're in this kind of world. But he very much enjoys just, being a busboy or being a lounge singer. It's a lot this poor little guy went through. He lost his whole family and he lost his whole world. And I think at this point, it's just a matter of processing. I think sitting on a planet that is being taken over by Plutarchians in the middle of a revolution, I think he probably would go a little mad if he had to stay there and do that kind of stuff a lot.
I imagine it's a bad idea to boo Garlu as a lounge
Yeah, let's not boo him.
singer. So another interesting character, like I said, the Sectaurs,
Mhm.
which you touch on in the Cellverse Zero. My memory of them is more of the toy. I remember the toys thing, and the toys looked cool. I never had any of them, but I remember the toys. I don't remember the series, but it's something to do with they were on a planet that somehow got sort. It wasn't poisoned, but something happened where the
Yeah, it was
insects
an
grew.
experiment that went weird, and so
Yeah.
now they're all insect hybrids with like insect companions. And there's a big civil war on the planet getting ready to start between the bad sectors and the good sectors. But it's very cool. It's kind of like feudal, like you have it's kind of like this royal dynamic, but also everybody, it's like it's fantasy if it was like it was if King Arthur took place on an alien planet. I feel like that's the Sectaurs. It's literally Knights of the Round Table, but instead of the horses, it's insects that they're riding.
Now, do we ever learn what the force was that caused the effect on their
I
planet?
don't think we have yet.
Is that something that
Um,
we're going to be discussing?
it's really up to Nacelle, I think at this point. We have to have like I don't want to say what they would decide or not to decide because they still have the animated series. So I'm sure that's something they're going to dive into. I know that it was just an experiment, but I don't know what they're planning on doing with it. And as far as the mini series, I'm still developing it a little bit, so we'll see where it goes. But I have a feeling that's a story they're going to want to have told. Whether I will tell it, we'll see.
Like I said, I was just it's kind of interesting what sticks in your brain, and the fact that Sector's the images of the heroes with the like the bug antennas, all that
Yeah.
sticks in my brain so strongly. It was interesting that those characters, without having a major property push in when they were around in the 80s, are that memorable of at least visually.
Yeah, because they're so unique. You don't
Hmm.
see anything like them. And I think that's what I really love about the Nacelleverse is that it's not like a DC or a Marvel, which I love, by the way. I'm a DC girl all the way, and I love Marvel. Obviously, I write for Marvel. So, um, but what I love about the Nacelleverse is that they're not. It's not a bunch of superheroes that just sitting around being superheroes. It's
Hmm.
real little worlds of different aliens and very different types of aliens. Like Power Lords was developed to be unlike anything you had ever seen. Like it was based on a very specific man's vision of what aliens could be, and they looked nothing like what aliens looked like
Hmm.
in any other property. And that's kind of what I love about it. And like the biker mice from Mars is just so unique. It's like there's mice on Mars and they're anthropomorphic and they're in the middle of a resistance to save their planet from destruction. And it's a war movie. And so it's just that's what I love about it. It's like nobody's trying to be a hero. They're forced into these circumstances, except for maybe power lords. But again, even the power lords are fighting for their their planet. They're not trying to out there be a superhero. It's not something that they were amping to become. It was something that was forced into them.
Now, with the biker mice from Mars, talking about being heroes, how heroic are they actually? Because they do kind of smack around Gar a little bit when he shows up. I mean, are they fully heroic or are they still?
I think they're on their way. I think when we see them, they're still figuring themselves out. Like if you see them in the comic, they don't have their modifications. They're not on Earth yet, right? So they haven't, Moto hasn't lost his arm. You know, uh, Benny hasn't lost his face. Throttle still can see. Like they're half formed. They're still figuring themselves out right now. Where we see them in the Nacelleverse, they are trying to. They understand what's happening to their planet, and they don't know yet how to stop it. And so, these are some young bikery guys that are just trying to save their planet. I don't think they see themselves as heroes yet. I think it's going to take a lot of war for them to come through on the other side with their priorities in check.
So, how long of a journey are they going to be in the comic book between where they're on Mars and then what we know they're going to become?
You know, uh, I want to leave a lot to the animated series. I feel like, that's really up to Nacelle. You're going to see them in a specific place in time on their way to that. But because there's so much story already told with the biker mice from Mars, I don't want to retell something that is already there.
Hmm.
So I'm looking at a window that maybe the fans haven't seen yet and trying to just really like help shed some light on that. That's my goal. and to who they're gonna become eventually, which is the mice we know and love.
Now, if my research was correct, the TV series is going to be produced by Ryan Reynolds. Is that correct?
He is, yeah, he's one of the producers.
So how involved is he, and like what kind of discussions were there about where that's headed?
That again is a question for Nacelle. They are the ones producing the animated series, so I've been very lucky to just be working on the comic books with these guys. But I assume that they're having big conversations. I just haven't been a part of them.
Now, what we know of these characters from the past, are they going to, is that something that is eventual canon with not just Biker Mice, but Sectaurs and Roboforce? Or should we consider what we see in the Nacelleverse as the continuity, and the other is sort of like the other series from the 80s or 90s are just kind of sort of like a pre-reboot world?
I mean, I can't speak for Biker Mice because I do not know. But I do know based on my conversations with Brian is that he is um, very determined to honor and appreciate the Biker Mice animated series and everything that came before it. I think the other ones, it's a little different because there's just so little there that you kind of have to redevelop it and you kind of have to reboot it from scratch
Hmm.
because otherwise what you have hasn't aged super well in terms of, what you're doing. You have to make something that's relevant and interesting for now. But Biker Mice might be its own animal. Like I wouldn't want to speak out of turn and tell him and say yes or no either way. I think he's very determined to honor the Biker Mice franchise as it was. Um, I mean, if there's going to be updates, I'm sure it's going to be just because, again, that there's like a trifle bit of stuff that a little bit of sexism, so, there's some stuff that maybe didn't age the best
Hmm.
that he might be having to tweak, but I don't think he's looking to mess with Biker Mice in any way, shape, or form. I think it's just one of those things where he knows how beloved that property is, and he's just what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to do like even the toys. Um, the biker mice have antennas. And so he was trying to figure out how to keep the antennas on the mice and still make the helmets work. And so he ended up having to remove the antenna and put different heads on, which is different how the original toys were. Not because he wanted to just do it to do it, but because that was the way it worked better. And I think that's kind of how he's going to approach the animated series and how we're approaching the comic book
Now, are these comic books going to be miniseries or ongoings?
miniseries.
Miniseries.
As far as I know, miniseries. Yeah.
How many issues are we talking?
3 issues, each
Three
one.
issues each?
Hmm.
After that, do you think there'll be a chance that we're going to get more out of it, or
I mean, I think it really depends on the fans, right? I think if the fans buy them, I think there's no reason to think that we wouldn't get more.
are there other properties that got picked up by the Nacelle company that we might be looking at in the future also becoming comic books and things that we haven't heard about yet?
I mean, I can't speak to specifically everything. I mean, we did a Moo Mesa cameo, which was fun. You never know. It really depends. They have a lot of properties, and it really depends on what Oni and Nacelle decide to do. I've just been really lucky to be told that I get to write these guys.
Are
So
are you going to write each miniseries?
as far as I know, yeah. We'll see if they change their minds.
When might we see these miniseries coming out?
Well, I'm working on Roboforce now and just getting started on Biker Mice. I think Roboforce is coming. Actually, let me pull out the book so I can tell you. I think it's in the back of the issue 0. It tells there's even a whole checklist. Aha, yes. Roboforce is on sale April 2024. Biker Mice starts July. And then Sectaurs and then Power Lords. So we got a whole year.
Well, like I said, the fans will be anxiously waiting for their biker mice and their sector and power lords. So, Miss Flores, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about this. I look forward to see what you do with these properties. And like I said, you're bringing part of my childhood now back to life again. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Diversity Stars podcast. Please help me battle those algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure to return for the next episode when we are visited by Carissa Grant.